I am delighted today to be able to introduce Bill Tobin. He is working with Shelterbox, and if any of you read your April 2020 Rotarian magazine, there was an article on Shelterbox there. It takes a year of intensive training to be part of a response team, to be able to work with the local communities after a disaster. And Bill is currently serving with them as their Rotary Relations Manager. He started with Shelterbox in 2010 after the Haiti disaster. And Bill is a fellow Rotarian of the Rotary Club of El Dorado, as well as his wife, who happens to be president this year. So they're a busy family. And you know me, every time I introduce someone, I like to find something that nobody knows about them. And Bill shared that he was a radio DJ back in the 1980s with a rock station, KSAN in San Francisco and KHTZ in Reno. So if you recognize those call signs and you listen to your DJ, that may have been Bill. Take it away, Bill.
Well, welcome. It's top of the hour here at Chico Rotary, the biggest Rotary in 5160. Well, it's been a long time since I tried to pull that voice off. It's good to see you, everybody. Hopefully you could see me too, and hopefully you can see below me a much bigger screen than my face. Is that correct, everybody? Somebody on say yes. I looked at the screen. It looks good.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
fantastic. Then all that technological stuff is working. Isn't that wonderful? I love that. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Shelterbox, and with such a large group here today, I'm sure some may be hearing about us or learning more about us for the first time. We were founded by a Rotary Club. It was their year 2000 project. They were going to help 20 families after disaster strikes. Other clubs found out about that and wanted to also take part in that project. So before they actually did anything, as in an actual deployment, they had enough funding for over 150 families. That first deployment took place in 2001 in Gujarat, India. A couple other highlights to point out right out the gate here. We are an official project partner of Rotary International. We were the first official project partner of Rotary International. It's a program that groups like UNICEF, the Bill Gates Foundation, Shelterbox, and a few others participate in, which really is a global outlook from a nonprofit partnership. It has to really have a global focus. And we are operated and funded completely independent to the Rotary International budget and Rotary Foundation funding. I'm a major donor of the Rotary Foundation, past Polio Plus chair here in District 5180. But when I donate to the Rotary Foundation, which I do every month, I know none of those funds get to Shelterbox. So it is all about shelter. We have several different types of shelter. If you've ever seen a tent, I'm sure there's more than one past president in the room, or President-elect Mark. I'm sure you saw it down in San Jose. We always have it out at Pets, and I'm sure those that went to the Four-Way Fest a couple years ago, we had it out there for that incredible multi-district conference. Our tents are, some of them are specifically designed for cold weather, some are designed not to look like much of anything, like the UN spec tent, and that's on purpose so that we don't stick out in the semi-dangerous areas or situations. We also do tarpaulin-based shelter. That's called a shelter kit. It includes some real heavy industrial type tarps. I have seen these used actually over at Sierra Nevada Brewery for temporary event structure type things. The real heavy duty tarpaulins are what we give to families, along with some tools and basic necessities included, of course, all the time. Things like water filters and mosquito netting, blankets and ground covers, cook sets. You know, there's some wonderful organizations in the world that deliver food, but sometimes, more often than not, the families that receive that food have to share cooking sets with other families. So we make sure the families we serve have a ways and means of cooking the food that we don't provide. We do not provide food ourselves. And it's really about reaching families, the most vulnerable families we could find in the communities we serve. These could be female head of household, or sometimes even teen-led head of households, families with young children, pregnancies, the elderly, those who have special challenges, either physically or psychologically. We've put tents up in shelters up for families that have autistic kids, and it really does a great job of getting those kids a sense of home again. And it is about kids as well. It's you know, they're the future, and they don't have the knowledge base to know that the cold of night could kill them and the heat of the day could kill them. So it's real important that we focus on the kids and the families that have a lot of kids, sometimes multi-generational families. Grace is and her family are they live in Malawi, and we helped them last spring. And March, Cyclone Idai struck there, and the floodwaters were so high and so swift that she had to put these children here, her children, up in trees in order to save their lives, or they would be swept away. Their housing is also typically made out of mud bricks, and although they're wonderful insulators against the heat of the summer and the chill of the winter, they disintegrate quite rapidly under cyclone rains and winds. So we were able to provide over 3,000 families in Malawi with the tarps that they needed in order to move out of collection centers and into their own homes again, or at least a temporary version of their home. And we really are a temporary measure, although it may take months and in some cases years before families are back on their own and not in need of our tarps or our tents. We are just a measure to get to where a family can once again call a place home. It's so important to realize where we operate in the world, there's really rarely anything even close to home insurance, and at that, the families we serve simply couldn't afford insurance if it were available or where it is available. And at the same token, the families we serve, they don't have the ways or means to have a truckload of materials show up to rebuild their houses. So it can take quite some time in order for folks to rebuild. And we want to make sure they have something to call home in the meantime. So we've had some pretty large deployments. You know, as I started out saying, the club wanted to help 20 people, and then they were able to help 150 people. And by 2004, they'd helped 20,000 families over numerous disasters and people displaced through conflict. And then the day after Christmas, on Boxing Day in 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami struck. And in that single response, Shelter Box was able to house over 22,000 families across 4 countries. And that really put us on a whole different level of existence as a disaster nonprofit that has a global reach. Not only do Rotary clubs all over the world hear about us for the first time in this response, but also the other UN agencies that do global assistance in disasters, like the UNHCR and the IOM and the International Red Crosses. They all saw that we were making a significant impact in this massive relief effort. And so we were then kind of more included in the project planning and the collaborations and the partnerships with some of the major disaster relief agencies around the world. Another notable deployment, in fact, this when I first heard about Shelter Box, was after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, and we helped over 33,000 families in response to that. It was at the time our largest number of families helped in response to one single disaster, and it still is as far as natural disasters go. But we have now helped nearly 60,000 people since fall of 2012 in and around Syria. We've been in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Turkey, in Greece. We've even done assessments in Italy because of the influx of refugees there. And we are currently still operating and working in Syria. Even this month, we have distributions going on inside the country of Syria. So after 20 years, I mean, we wanted to start with 20 families, and look at what we've done in 20 years, 1.5 million people and counting, well over 300 responses now in over 100 countries. And the need in the world is still just unbelievable. 88 million people are displaced around the world, 17 million by natural disaster, 70 million by conflict. That number, 70 million, is a total greater than the families, or rather the people displaced in World War I and II combined. Yeah, let that sink in. More people displaced than World War I and II combined are displaced right now around the country due to conflict, or the world rather. And it's really, we're not at a world war, but the population density on the planet is so much greater now than it was in the 1940s that it doesn't take that great a war to displace more people. I'll point out right now that Glenn's got a copy of my slides. These are updated, Glenn, so I'll send you a new copy so he can get those out to anyone who might be calling in on a phone or something, because I might mention a photograph or something in a photograph, and you won't have a chance to see that if you're on a phone. So I'll get that sent out to the club right after the meeting. This partnership with Rotary, okay, you learned we were started by a Rotary club, and a lot of Rotary clubs know about us, but how much deeper does it get? Well, certainly fundraising is a part of it. Clubs do events solely on our behalf. In fact, later this month, we have a stand-up comedian, stand-up for Shelter Box that one of our ambassadors putting on with a nationwide audience. So I'll also be sure and get you that information too, if you'd like to attend that. We're funded in and out of Rotary. In fact, we have more funding that comes in outside of Rotary sources than we do within Rotary sources. So that's a good thing. That means we've branched out beyond Rotary, and so we aren't as reliant on that Rotary donation. But again, as more Rotary clubs could give, the more families we could help. There's a district governor in New York a few years ago. He challenged all the clubs in his district to donate $1,000, $3,000, or $5,000, depending on size and capabilities of those clubs. And by the time his district conference ran around, he had more than 50% of those clubs. He called them hero clubs. He gave them costumes and special banners and all sorts of good things. So we've rolled the hero program out across the United States, where there's over 7,000 clubs. And currently this Rotary year, and well, hopefully we'll hit 600, but we're almost at 600 clubs so far this year. And we're looking at a calendar year, seeing as though it's our 20th year of existence by the regular calendar, not the Rotary calendar. We're hoping to have at least 700 hero clubs across the United States. Our volunteers they're the heart and soul of what we do. They really are, whether they're club champions, who would be someone in your club that just reports all of our current events to your club, to being an ambassador, what I've done for several years before I started working full time at Shelter Box. And that's going out and talking to other clubs and setting up a tent at Pets or at Four Way Fest or wherever it's needed. And then there's the response team members, and those are really our frontline workers. And we aren't exclusive to Rotarians to be a volunteer for Shelter Box. In fact, just the opposite. If you know people who aren't Rotarians, they have skills you think could help Shelter Box, send them our way, because we have many times over brought people into Shelter Box, exposed them to Rotary, and then they go join a Rotary club. So when a disaster strikes in a country, sometimes the first point of contact's back and forth between us and the Rotary district governor. We have an international liaison team that knows certain areas of the world where they will communicate right out the gate when the disaster strikes, so that contact's made. And then if we decide to deploy, and we don't always are able to deploy to every disaster, obviously they happen all the time all over the world, but when we do deploy, we rely on Rotarians in that area of disaster for things like importation of the gear, signing that paperwork, co-signing the stuff coming in, transportation and translations. Obviously, those things are much needed, but also information. Information. I've been up to Chico a few times. I live in El Dorado Hills, grew up in Northern California. I've been there more than one time. But if there was a disaster up there, I wouldn't necessarily know where to start looking for the most vulnerable people in Chico. So that kind of mentality is where the Rotary Club really comes into play, because I could come ask you, and you would know real quick, and together we go out and start looking for those families. And in most countries, we do come and respond in the United States, but not very often, because we got such great resources here. The places we are around the world, they don't have the safety nets or the resources where we are. And we're not a large organization, so when we send a team out, it's about the size of a volleyball team. It's 6 to maybe 10 people. And so the Rotarians where we are responding are really the face of our disaster relief. We will train the local Rotarians on the gear that they will then give to the beneficiaries. And we found a lot of advantages to doing it this way. Primarily, it's the fact that it's a local face, it's local language, it's local customs and cultures, mannerisms. It instills a sense of calm and a sense of trust, because they're Rotarians, and Rotarians wherever we work around the world, we're people you could trust. So our deployments, when we involve Rotary, which is 90% of the time there's involvement with Rotary, it's so beneficial to the overall effort. And then when we leave, Rotary clubs still aren't necessarily done. We will sometimes task them to help us with post-distribution monitoring, where they go back again to those families they've served, and they ask, how did the blankets keep you warm? Did the mosquito nets, are there enough mosquito nets? Things like, well, the best one, is there anything else you need? Anything else you need? Our solar lights, for example, came out of that conversation. So let's talk about the here and now. That's enough about, I think, about our history and our partnership. I hope I've convinced everyone that it's one of the most top 5 things Rotary International history. And I can think of polio and going global and youth exchange and vocational services and shelter box. There you go. That's my top 5. We're real busy around the world right now, incredibly busy considering the circumstances that we're dealing with. It's so complex, and we have to be ready to be capable of changing on the fly, and we're doing a pretty darn good job of it. In Tanzania, we're working with Rotary and with the International Red Cross to help people displaced due to flooding. In Somaliland, we are helping families on both flooding and drought, which is pretty unique across one country. You have both displacements due to both natural disasters there. In Vanuatu, there's no coronavirus, 0, not 1 case. So they also had a cyclone that came through the Northern Islands. Destruction 80% and greater in some areas in the Northern Islands. So they need the aid, but they don't want the people. We can deal with that. We've worked there before. There's an organization called CARES. We're getting gear en route there right now. They're going to get up to those Northern Islands, the pockets of people who still have no help, and we'll be able to do a deployment 100% remotely. There is Rotary in Vanuatu, but total membership, about a quarter of the size of your club, about 36 people. So they're swamped with their own community work, and so we are working with other agencies there primarily. Let's see what else is on this beautiful map here. Burkina Faso and Ethiopia, those are ongoing. Been in Ethiopia for 2 years now doing displacements due to conflict. We're just gearing up. We just got gear in country this week in the Burkina Faso, where over 500,000 people have been displaced due to conflict. And I think the rest of these I'll cover in just a second, the rest of these countries on the map there where we are currently. John Hugo, hopefully you know who John Hugo is. If not, shame on you, you should. He's the General Secretary of Rotary International. And he has made a statement saying how vitally important shelter box is in this response to COVID-19. And that's really important to note. You know, why would we be so important? Why would refugees or people displaced due to disaster be at higher risk? Well, when there's an evacuation center or people have to go to a refugee camp, you have a much denser population. In Wuhan, China, 6,000 people per square kilometer. That's a city of 13 million people. A square kilometer is about 250 acres. Rohingya refugee camp, on the other hand, 40,000 people per square kilometer, and a total population in the Cox's Bazar of Bangladesh, where the Rohingya refugees are located, is close to 1 million people. This is a picture from there, and you can see how important something as simple as a tarp is to keep the rain and the elements out of the house. These families these are not single family homes. There's families 2, 3, 4, sometimes 25 or 30 people amongst 3 or 4 families living in each one of these buildings. The second thing that's really of concern right now globally is that where we operate in the world, there's simply no healthcare resources. They don't exist at the levels of what you see elsewhere in the world. You saw how hard it was for New York City to keep up with an influx of COVID-19. Imagine what it would be like in Syria or Ethiopia or any one of these countries on this list. These are all countries where the UN Shelter Cluster, where we're proud to be a partner in the UN Shelter Cluster, a group of about 36 aid agencies helping the refugees around the world. And we're in every one of the locations with a red arrow. We're working with refugees, with the exception of the Philippines. There is some refugee work in the Philippines, way in the southern part of the islands, but we are working elsewhere against other things. We're doing work because the Taal volcano is at a heightened potential for eruption, so they do mandatory evacuation. So those families are living in evacuation centers or in multiple family homes with host families. And like we did with the Paradise folks, we had host families here in our community, just like you guys did. You take in those families. Well, with coronavirus, it makes it a much more dangerous situation. And also in the Philippines, we're working after a typhoon went north of Manila, up on the island there, and we're doing an assessment to help families there. But I think most importantly in the Philippines, real recently on the island of Cebu, we were asked by the Eversley Hospital to help ease overcrowding due to COVID-19 overflow of patients there. So something, again, as simple as tarps, ropes, and other materials we were able to provide, they can now accommodate up to 100 more patients a day in consultations and in triage areas. We also have to now really distribute using social distancing. This is a real recent picture from Somaliland, where, as I mentioned earlier, we have a couple different deployments going on there. And normally this would be a line of people where you really wouldn't see, where one's, be going into a football game kind of thing. Everyone's got a ticket for the aid, but the families are closely knit together. And here you can see we have to practice social separation. Same could be said in Syria. Here we are on a real recent deployment. And again, typically you wouldn't know where one family starts and the other stops, but we have to isolate these families from one another as best we can. And again, it's just so important to do this. It's what we're doing here on this phone call. We're staying away from one another. It's the only thing that's really been proven to have a chance to stop this virus and this COVID disease from emerging. And it's so much harder in densely populated areas, which is where you find refugees and people displaced due to disaster. So getting them out into tents and isolated from one another is vitally important in the roles of fighting this virus around the world. The Lake Chad Basin, we've been there for several years. Boko Haram, it's a name most of you have probably heard in the news through the years. They're alive and well in this area. They've displaced over 2 million people, and they continue to displace people. They continue acts of violence. Even through the month of April and May, they're doing acts of violence in this area. Combined with terrorist action, you have an ecological disaster, which has taken decades to happen. There was over a 20-year drought, which virtually drained Lake Chad, once an oasis shared by 4 countries, that is now just a shadow of its former self. And it will take a century or longer at average or above average rainfall to refill a lake of this size. So you could see a group like Boko Haram and their strategy. If we can control the water, we can control the people. And it's been very successful tactics in this area. So several refugee camps have opened up since 2013 and even before then. One I'm going to show you today is Minawao. That's one where we are the only provider of tented shelter within the camp. It's got 70,000 people living there. You can see it on Google Maps. I mean, it's so big, it looks like any other city of 70,000 people, minus the infrastructure of roads and big buildings. But look it up on Google Maps this afternoon. You'll see exactly what I'm showing you here, with the exception of the little round red dot, which I'll zero in on, and you'll see that this is shelter box tents and tarp-based shelter. Over 70,000 people living in the Minawao camp, and it's over 80% women, 80% female. Reason being, when Boko Haram raids the villages, they will massacre the men and the teenage boys, and they will kidnap the young children. And anyone who they don't kill or kidnap are, I guess, not necessarily in a safe situation, as they are told to run, like poor Esther was told to run in 2014 when she was 17 and had just witnessed the murder of her mom, her dad, and her 3 older brothers, and the bounding of her little brother for slavery. And then she's told to run. Well, when Boko Haram kidnaps these kids, they either hold them for ransom, but these people don't have money. And so in these villages, they're kidnapping to sell the girls into the slavery business around the world. And they usually will conscript the boys to be their own slaves or force them into their militias. And when someone like Esther's told to run, previously, young boys and girls from previous kidnaps are out there waiting in the wings with sticks with rocks, trying to kill people. It's horrific, it's barbaric, and yet it's happening right here, right now. So Esther is married now. She's been in the camp a few years. She's a mom. She owns a seamstress business. Yeah, there's an economy in refugee camps. You might not realize that. Not much use for dollars and cents, but the barter system, trading goods, is very, very much in demand there. And it gives folks something to do, and they feel proud about what they could do, and they could take care of some of their family needs that way. Again, training, even in areas like this, is so paramount for us. These families, they're on the verge of malnourishment. The water sources can't always be trusted. We have to give them a training on the aid that we provide. And we do the follow-up work in refugee camps as well to make sure that we're have a good impact. Privacy, safety, and confidence, those are great building blocks for a future peace in these areas. Real quick in Syria, we know a lot more about Syria. It's in the news much more around the world than the Lake Chad Basin. We are getting gear there as fast as we can in country. We don't usually put it in a green box because it's too hard to import once you've taken it off a factory pallet and repacked it. But we are adding items like soap and wash basins so that young and old alike can not only stop the spread of coronavirus, but all the other things that are spread by not washing your hands. This is and her family. They had nothing at the beginning of, in the middle of winter, absolutely nothing but the clothes on their back. Everything you see in this picture is a benefit of having Shelter Box involvement in the area. And with that, I thank you so much. We are Nobel Peace Prize nominees over the last 2 years. I think that is a wonderful measurement of our impact. Like the Rotary Foundation, we are checked by Charity Navigator. We have the 4-star rating there. Thanks again so much. I will stop sharing now, and we will get back to regular club business. Did I stop sharing? Did it work?
It worked. Thank you,
Okay,
Bill.
fantastic.
A great presentation. We have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any, you can unmute yourself and or turn your camera on and ask Bill, or you can type them into the chat box on the side. So any questions? Quiet group today, Bill. Either that or they haven't found their mic
mute button. Yeah, that's a.
Hey, Bill, this is Dana. I just wanted to say thank you for presenting to us. Very interesting. What an incredible organization.
Well, thank you, Dana. I'm glad to make the visit. I think I spoke to your club once before in like 2012, maybe. I remember I did the 2 clubs in Chico. So hopefully I'll be up there and be able to see you guys in person the next time.
That would be
Great.
great.
Tony was president.
All right, any other questions or comments? I'm seeing some comments in the chat box, Bill, so take a look at those. All right, well, I will keep the session open for a couple minutes after we close in case anybody wants to ask a question. But in the meantime, Bill, thank you for presenting to us today. As you know, we are in our centennial year as a club, celebrate our 100th anniversary next April. And our project for the year is a community park in the northeast section of Chico on Ceres Avenue. It will be called Rotary Centennial Park, about 5 acres, and we're teaming up with our sister club here in Chico to do that, along with the city of Chico and the Chico Recreation District. So want to know that we'll be making a donation in your name to that project for speaking to us today. So thank you very, very much. So.
Oh, you're welcome. What a wonderful centennial project.
It is. We're just dying to get started too, you know.
Yeah.
So